Hi, everyone. Welcome to In the Can with Carmella Cann. Today we have a very special episode and two very special guests. Our episode is the culture war on gender issues in America. Today we have Ryan from New York City and Jeremiah from California. I'm going to start with Jeremiah. Jeremiah, I know you appeared on our last episode where you were off camera, and today you're on camera. Could you elaborate why you decided to come back on camera this time?
Yeah, I was originally so scared when the first episode was going to happen. And I didn't want to experience consequences that I think I was actually drumming up in my own head. I feel it's important to be able to speak your truth, say how you feel on things, be respectful and diplomatic. And as long as I'm doing that, I have nothing that I should be afraid about. If I ever have children, I want to tell them, don't be afraid to speak your voice. So I have to lead by example.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on again.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations, Jeremiah. That's a big step.
Thank you.
So I'm going to get right into the topic. I'm going to ask a question, and both of you are going to have an opportunity to talk about it. Just to be clear, Jeremiah, you're Republican, correct? You identify as Republican?
Yes, correct.
And Ryan, you're an independent, correct?
Independent, yes.
So my first question I'm going to start with, I know there's been a culture war going on between Democrats and Republicans, specifically on transgender issues. And one of the issues is transgender women in women's sports. It's kind of being debated and kind of it's a conversation we're having as an American culture. Ryan, what are your thoughts when we talk about transgender women in women's sports?
Well, first, I just wanted to call out, I have Minneapolis as my background because they were actually the first city in the United States in 1975 to pass protections for transgender people as well as LGBTQ people. So shout out to them for being ahead of the pack. In terms of trans women competing in sports, I'm conflicted on it because, first of all, there's obvious real issues with body. Certain bodies that are born a certain sex have advantages than others, right? More muscle mass, more capabilities to sprint versus long-term running. The ability to pull harder, swim faster because they have those muscle mass buildups. So I don't know what the answer is. I think that just completely ignoring that does sort of lend credence to the argument that it's unfair. But I also don't think that you should prohibit people from playing in sports because of their gender identity. I think perhaps there's a solution that's just not being considered. Maybe it's creating a category for people who don't fit into those buckets and letting them compete like that. I don't know what the full answer is yet.
So you think maybe transgender people should have their own lane, so to speak?
And
okay.
I'm not in a separate but equal kind of way, but just in a more, if you have someone who has been building their body mass for 6 years and decides that they want to compete as another gender now, and maybe that's probably a very small amount of individuals that something like that might occur in, but it's still not fair to those who have biological what am I trying to say? Hang-ups, I guess, that would prevent them from competing at that same level.
So you do agree that there is an element of biology that plays a role, and people who are born male, cis male, have an advantage?
Not necessarily an advantage. I mean, it depends on the sport, right? Like there are probably tennis players who could kick every man's ass, like look at Serena and Venus, right? But I definitely think to ignore that as a possibility is a little bit, I don't know, not thinking holistically about the situation.
Got it. Jeremiah, what are your thoughts on transgender people in women's sports?
You know, just matter of fact, I feel those with XX chromosomes should compete with those that have XX chromosomes, and those with XY chromosomes compete with other XY chromosomes. And it's not diminishing saying, you know, you're not allowed to compete with the gender you want to identify with. You're just going along like what Ryan was talking about, things that are biologically unchangeable. Um, it's I don't feel like it's excluding these athletes from participating by making them partake in the sport that their DNA equates with.
I mean, I hear that, but like, they present in a female way. So therefore, they're going to stand out if they compete in a male competition. How does that kind of work if, like, we take, people who are trans women and then putting them on male sports? It's kind of like a trans woman going into a male bathroom when she presents a certain way.
You know, that's one thing that you also have to keep into mind is once you start allowing things, where's that line going to be drawn? I can't remember that athlete. I'm not a huge fan of the person, so I don't remember the name. Is it Leah Thomas?
Leah Thomas, a swimmer on the University of Pennsylvania's women's swim team, has become the first openly transgender athlete to win a Division I NCAA championship.
Yes.
Is that the person?
The swimmer?
Yeah, an example of that is when Leah was competing in competitions, Leah wasn't placing so high at all whatsoever. Yet when Leah went ahead into the women's division, now all of a sudden Leah is being very successful in that. And Ryan had a very good point is that, you know, people are able to maybe build up their mass in a certain way. And hypothetically, what if that person says, well, now I have the muscle mass or I have the strength that a lot of my female competitors don't have. So now I can go ahead and compete against them and win, all because I am choosing to say I am now that opposite gender.
So, an important question too around this subject is: do you believe transgender women are real women?
I believe that genetically there are only two genders. I have nothing against the trans community at all whatsoever. I knew this type of question was going to be asked, and I actually saw something that I think a lot of people don't realize is that the gay community actually outrightly says that there are only two specific genders. And you know how that is? The B and LGBT for bisexual. So when you're bisexual, you're attracted to either the male gender or the female gender. So yes, I believe there's only two genders, two sexes, but people are allowed to go and change what they want to personally identify as. If they want to go and mentally say, I mentally feel like I'm this type of individual, go ahead. But no, I am 100% convicted that there are only two sexes.
Well,
How about you, Ryan? Ryan, do you believe that transgender women are real women?
Well, I think that first of all, we have to separate sex from gender because they're not the same thing. So you have your male and female anatomy, right? But then you also have intersex people which make up a small degree of the population, but they do have I don't know how to say this, private areas that could be one or the other, or a combination of the two. This is not a new thing that has existed. It has existed in entire documented history. The Greeks called them hermaphrodites, which is an offensive term used today. It happens across all of the biological spectrum. You see it in animals and creatures across the board. So that's a different thing, I think, than gender, which is how you present and what you identify at, the societal norms that are put against male, female, whatever, and what you align yourself to. So you're playing with gender right now, being a drag queen, right?
Yeah, I'm presenting in a different gender. Yeah,
as a different gender, right? So there are people who consider that a form of gender identity. There are people who consider themselves non-binary, which don't really subscribe to either. They may have facial hair and could be a woman. There are plenty of women who don't choose to have their facial hair removed.
I mean, I kind of consider myself as as an artistic expression. I don't necessarily know if I'm even though, yeah, I am dressing up as a different gender. For me, it's more of an artistic expression necessarily than gender so much.
And that's, I think that's a beauty of free speech and the ability to express yourself how you choose. And
may I rebuttal actually to what Ryan said if he's done with his thought?
Sure.
Yeah, well, I wasn't really done yet.
Okay, so then go ahead, because I don't want to be rude. So I thought you were done speaking.
No, I lost my train of thought though, so go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeremiah, and then I'll move on and ask the next question.
What I think is a very interesting point, because Ryan was saying that I believe I am confusing sexes with gender. It actually goes a lot deeper than that, deeper to our DNA. Our DNA can't change. You can be emotional and say, I emotionally feel like I'm this person. But when you look at your DNA, unfortunately, it's not like that. So even if you go and get different surgeries and you feel like, okay, now I'm actually a woman or now I'm actually a man, on the scientific DNA level, they are not. I'm sorry, it's not to be rude, but
So
you can't change DNA.
how do you quantify intersex people who have an XXY chromosome or just one X chromosome? How do you qualify those people, Jeremiah?
And with that, because they do technically have both of those chromosomes, that's when I feel like, yeah, go with what you feel more accustomed to. Who knows? What if those that are intersex feel like they have more testosterone to where they do want to identify as a man? Or if they're intersex and because of that are given more estrogen and want to identify as a woman, then great, because on that DNA level, they can do both. But a man wanting to go and then say, I'm going to be a woman, unfortunately, DNA wise, that's not possible.
So you're proposing mandatory DNA testing for everyone to assign gender.
I can't go against what science is saying. So if you want to suggest doing tests like that, then you can go ahead and maybe come up with a plan that you could do to legislation, like
I don't want
to. So I honestly don't care enough. I'm just giving my opinion that I feel you can only identify with what your DNA is, and intersex does have those different DNAs. So in that case, if an intersex were to go and choose one of those genders, I wholeheartedly believe that they are the gender they identify with because their body has both of it.
So I'm going to just move on to the next question. So one of the issues being debated and, that's been controversial is our idea of changing the definition of women to be more inclusive for transgender women or the definition of man. I know a lot of very liberal women who really also are having a problem with this and feel as though there should be another lane. Some people who don't consider transgender women per se in the woman category. And for the last several centuries, we've always used the word woman or girl with sex on some level, biological sex. When, a woman went to the doctor and she's told she's pregnant and she's having a baby, the doctor will say, "Oh, you're having a boy," and he's usually using the word boy based on the sex of the baby. So what are your thoughts, Ryan, on that? The fact that, do we change the definition of woman to be inclusive? And I know that there's a lot of liberal women who are having a problem with this and believe that transgender women should have their own lane and not be included in the definition of woman.
I don't really have an opinion on this because I'm not a woman, so I can't really speak for them. I don't like to speak for them. I prefer to let them speak for themselves. If women feel uncomfortable with that, that's their prerogative. I can understand why someone would want to fully identify so that they don't feel like an other. It's sort of similar to how LGBTQ people want equal rights. It's like, we don't want to be considered some other group that gets the scraps and has to apply differently for things like marriage or a job or protections to ensure that we're not discriminated against. So I can understand that, but I don't know. It's tough because.
But we also have another label. So like you have heterosexual and gay. So the gay differentiates us as different right there.
Are you saying that trans women want to be considered just women and not trans women?
Yes, I do think that in gender affirming care, the process is to affirm trans women that they are women.
And you could hear them in the background, these trans women yelling, trans women are real women, and on and on and on, making fools of themselves, okay? And that's not good. It's horrible for trans people in general. Yeah. It's horrible. It makes us look selfish. The Leah Thomases of the world, trans girls swimming, it's not good for trans people. It makes them look selfish, self-indulged. It's like all about me. It's not about all these other girls I'm beating. I don't even play in my in my club's women's tournaments. They've asked me to play in the women's golf tournament. Oh, yeah. But I can outdrive them by 100 yards. I haven't been on testosterone in 8 years, and I can still hit the ball 280 yards.
The title of woman, and the woman title is gender identity versus gender towards sex.
I think this could be solved by that sex versus gender delineation, because you could still have their sex be something else and then their gender be whatever they choose to express, because not all trans women undergo the surgeries, right? They don't necessarily have to go to that length to consider themselves to be women. So what levels do we qualify it? Do we say only if you've had those surgeries can you be considered a real woman? Does that exclude women who can't have babies? Like if they don't have a uterus to reproduce, does that eliminate them? People who are born women? I don't know. It's super complex, and I don't think it's black and white at all.
Jeremiah, what are your thoughts? Should we change what we know as the definition of woman to be inclusive of transgender women, or you think that trans women should have their own lane and not be included in that?
I honestly think they should probably have their own lane. I'm sorry. It's not me trying to be, showing hatred to a certain group, but I just can't shift my opinion when it comes down to the DNA. I'm sorry, according to the DNA, you are specifically this thing. So if they want to create their own category, great, but they will never be able to say at a DNA level, I am this such and such. So that's just one thing my mind will not be able to be changed on.
So you don't believe trans women are women?
I don't believe they are biological women, no.
So I live my life as a woman, but I don't consider myself this, like, I am a woman now and on and on. No, I consider myself a trans person.
You know, I mean, and this is something that's, you know, being debated right now in this country. You know, the idea of gender as a construct is relatively new. And, you know, in the last decade or less, I say that, you know, we've had terms in the LGBTQ community of gender nonconforming, or, you know, there's various genders one can identify, and these are still a relatively new concept. That I think,
new. I sort of feel like other cultures have had non-binary gender expression in many forms. I mean, there's the Two-Spirit in the Native American community. There's many Amazon tribes that have gender that is not so concrete as to what we make it. I think that our inability to be flexible in it is relatively new. And I think there's been a movement to go a little bit, I don't want to say like extreme, it's not extreme, but it's like very broad and nuanced in delivering however many there are now. I think there's like over 100 different terms that people use for gender identity. Don't quote me on that, I may be wrong. But I think that academic pursuit of understanding it is relatively new. And as a result, we get a lot more attention across the board because people typically have not understood the dynamics there.
I mean, I'm just gonna talk about my personal experience. I mean, when I was in my undergrad degree 20 years ago, you know, I took health class, I remember, and the idea of gender was based on sex, was male, female. I recently went back for a master's degree and I took a diversity and inclusion class where now it's being taught that gender is based on a construct. And so this is a new concept that has not been around. And I do think that some people are a little confused because there are people who still identify gender on sex. Like I said, a doctor will tell a pregnant woman if she's having a baby, whether it's a boy or girl, based on the sex she's having. She doesn't say, well, you're having a cis boy and we don't know what gender it's going to be when it grows up. So, you know, it's kind of a struggle, I think, that society's having. This is a conversation now where, I mean, you know, also some women are don't like some of the terms that are being used, being called, you know, a birthing person. I've heard that term, birthing person. And some people are, you know, don't like that to be referred as a birthing person. They want it to be referred as a woman. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Do you think it's really that new though? Because I remember growing up, and I grew up in the South. So I remember terms like tomboy and pansy and, you know, things like that that were sometimes used in derogatory ways or to ridicule, but essentially insinuating that a person didn't fall into your typical gender norms of male or female, right? So obviously not an academic approach and more around bullying, but I think that stemmed from people recognizing that there aren't concrete, you know, one way or the other. There are different nuances to both, and some people don't fall into those buckets. And now we're in a place where people are choosing to self-identify and empower themselves to own it in a way that does cause confusion, understandably, to many others who don't sit within those broad parameters. But I think that the blowback from it is largely being fanned and fueled by the political environment of, look here, look at this crazy blah 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 blah, let's go after them, let's pass legislation towards them, even though they're less than 1% of 1% of 1% of the whole population. I think it's really just a larger, the larger crux of this is trying to pit all of us against each other to confuse us and not focus on the real issues that matter around our economy and our government completely being ineffective and unable to legislate in a way that actually benefits us and helps us all.
I mean, what are your thoughts, Jeremiah, on the idea that, we're kind of trying to redefine what things mean and coming up with terms that are more inclusive in terms of when we talk about gender?
Yeah. You can't redefine DNA, but like what Ryan was saying, there are many cultures that do identify with different things, like the whole two-spirit. But if you're going to start using that as an excuse to validify going against human DNA, defining what your DNA is telling you you are, what about those that are spiritually believing that their life is reincarnated here on Earth? I know someone and she claims in a past life I was Marilyn Monroe. What's going to stop that person or other people that are so convicted that I was this person in a past life, that they go around and start saying, I'm this individual? So are we going to now and accept all of these people to claim they're now this reincarnated Marilyn Monroe? It's an outlandish comparison, because the whole topic is so ridiculous. Like it's unfathomable to me, honestly. So just back to what I said, I don't know. I just can't get past the whole DNA thing.
I mean, and some people cannot. A lot of people do think of gender as sex and don't think of it as a separate identity. One of the founders of gender as a construct is John Mooney, and he kind of coined gender role. And I agree that there are roles that we play in society according to gender. And, there's various roles we play as norms. There's roles we play as workers. There's roles we play as family members. There's roles we play in gender. So, that's just a little bit of social science. And that, but, right now, there's terms being used like indoctrination in universities and organizations and schools that are now starting to teach that gender is part of, one can identify in various genders, and that there's more than one gender. It's a big issue for a lot of parents and people who work for certain organizations who don't, this kind of goes against their belief system that there's only two genders. What are your thoughts, Ryan? I mean, do you believe that there's more than one gender, two genders? And what are your thoughts about now organizations and universities and schools teaching this new gender as a construct?
Yes, I do believe that there are multiple genders. I've seen many people who express characteristics of one or the other, or multiple, that don't necessarily fall into a bucket. But then also I want to go back to the sex piece, though. The DNA point that Jeremiah is making is a little bit erroneous, because there are actual markers that affect the physical presentation. I mean, when you're looking at a DNA chromosome, the hormone which determines development of male parts, if it isn't present, then you could have an XY presenting as an XX female, right? So, and then you have the intersex piece, which could alter that as well. So it's not so concrete or clear cut there. But in terms of gender roles and recognition, I mean, currently there's almost 100 different ones, which are categorized and analyzed by the academic community. And as far as teaching that, I don't see anything wrong with teaching people about what exists in this world. You're obviously welcome to believe what you do or don't want to believe. But the fact is that we teach people a lot of things, right? There are schools that teach religion, that Mary had a baby without having intercourse, and that child was the son of God. I mean, like, how preposterous does that sound?
I
But
mean,
they in schools. I was taught.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but yes, there are schools who teach that, but usually a parent is making a choice to send their child to a religious school that is teaching religious doctrine.
Right.
When I'm sending my child to a public school, I don't necessarily have the choice of the curriculum. And if I don't believe in gender as a construct, and this is being taught to my child, where does that kind of play a role? Because from I mean, how old do you think someone should be exposed to this theory of gender as a construct?
I'm not aware of public schools like requiring that in any instances. I think in my experience, when I went to a public school, they made us have our parents sign a permission slip for sex education, which wasn't taught until I believe I was 15 or 16, which is probably too late, honestly. I knew kids that were having sex when they were 11 and 12. But I would love to see the statistics around how often that is taught in schools, because I imagine it's extremely minimal, if almost non-existent. That's just not typically something that people teach as a part of core curriculum.
I mean, I don't know. I believe and again, I don't have a child who's registered in school, but from what I've seen in the media, it's my understanding that this is being taught, in grammar school, gender as a construct. I have a friend of mine who has a 9-year-old daughter, and one of the things the teacher asked her was what gender she identified with.
What's occurring in the schools right now is inappropriate. It's inappropriate to tell a child that they can make a decision about changing their gender. That is something a child has no capability of making an informed and intelligent decision about.
And I know that the mother was not happy that the teacher asked the daughter this. And so this is happening as early as 8 and 9 years old, in 3rd, 4th grade. Jeremiah, what are your thoughts on that? Should gender as a construct be taught in public education? And what age, if it is taught, should it start at?
Oh, this angers me so much because of how against I am with what's happening in society, in our educational system, in the public schools. Things are just getting so out of hand to where, like you said, what that teacher was asking that child, what gender do you identify as? It's not the school's responsibility to go and try to help a student navigate through life what their gender is. That's the parent's job. The job of the school is to make sure that they're receiving the proper academics in public school, the proper academics for English, history, math, science. I know in my school we had like wood shops, so then you can learn some skills of doing things like that, or home ec. And like Ryan was saying, you had to get a permission slip for sex ed. And my dad never signed that slip because he said, this is something that we are going to talk to you about at home because you are my child and I want to teach you what I want you to know. Of course, you know, very thoroughly, and not giving that parental responsibility to the school. The schools are now acting like they can take on the role of being a parent, and they can't. They're not the parent. Stick with the basic academics. If you want to have a gender affirming classroom, or if you want to be able to have something like that where you're grooming your child, the school system grooming that child to possibly identify as a different gender, open up a private school that does stuff like that. So you can go ahead and send your kid to that private school to be groomed at a young age on that type of thing. But when it comes to the public school system, no, none of that should be taught at all of any age whatsoever. The school system is overstepping. Only the parents should be the ones that should be able to help guide their children. If the children are asking certain questions, instead of using the teacher as a guidance, use the parents to help guide them. That's the job of the parents, not the teacher.
Well, I have two comments to make. First of all, my friend, her daughter was not asked specifically, it was asked to everyone in the classroom. It wasn't like she was targeted per se.
And that's even worse.
But my second, moving to something you brought up, that it's not the role of the school to play parent. What if a child has a transphobic parent, and that their safety net is in school environment? What are your thoughts there? I mean, as LGBTQ people, I have several friends who've had homophobic parents when they came out 20, 30 years ago, and whose parents, shunned them from their home and had a lot of difficulties dealing with their sexual orientation. And I'm sure that also transfers over to the transgender community and their parents who, would have a hard time and are not accepting. I mean, what are your thoughts, Jeremiah, on that?
My thoughts are, I went through that myself with my sexuality. Unfortunately, parents aren't perfect. They are going to have parents that aren't supportive of things. I was born into the Jehovah's Witness religion. I was never allowed to accept my sexual orientation. And look at me.
You're essentially saying that people are trying to groom children and become pedophiles by doing that, which is like horrific. Like the majority of pedophiles, if we want to go down that route, are Republican conservative people who
you're the one that actually brought up the word pedophile.
Excuse me, I'm talking.
Go ahead.
I think if you want to have a respectful conversation, you can shut your mouth and let me finish mine. I think that the Republicans typically are the ones who are pedophiles, who groom children for their own purposes and molest them. You can see it countless times where there are cases involving people who pretended to be conservative, passing legislation against trans and gay people, and they ended up being the ones who were actually behind closed doors doing things that were inappropriate. So I think you should remove the term grooming from any educator who's trying to have a conversation and understand what children are going through and offer them resources to help them.
So, this is an interesting conversation because, I mean, right now there is a big debate about what the role of a public school is in terms of people's kids and what should be part of a curriculum and not. There is, and this is going on because I actually have friends who have kids who told me that they are being taught this in school. And it's happening as early as, 3rd and 4th grade. So, and there are a lot of parents who are disturbed by this, who are not comfortable with their child that early being taught that gender is a construct. I don't know what the right age is, if it's high school, if it's college age. If you had to choose an age, what would be your thoughts of what age do you think that this should be part of the curriculum?
I
Ryan.
think I would say probably around the same age that sex ed is taught. I think that letting kids explore what they want to explore in a harmless way, like if a kid wants to wear a dress, let them. Who cares? If they want to play with dolls, who cares? I don't necessarily think that that's connected to sex, which is why I think a lot of them are giving that option of understanding what they're doing. But I think that, yeah, I mean, if it's really that big of an issue for people to have a conversation around, like, oh, if you want to wear pink, it's okay, doesn't matter, and that offends them, I mean, maybe they need to look in the mirror about why it offends them, because gender is not related to sex, I don't think.
And Jeremiah, what are your thoughts? Should what age, if gender as a construct were to be taught in school, do you think it would be appropriate? Grammar school, high school, university, not taught at all?
I have two answers for that. One of which is if it's in private school and the parents know that that's being taught and approve it being taught at any age, then fine, because that's private school. No age in public school, so I don't, even up until senior year, I don't think anything like that should be taught in public school. I think it should be taught in college because you're paying a tuition. So you're an adult, and because you're an adult, you're, not having what I was getting to with the schools taking the new role of being a parent. You're now able to go and help make decisions for yourself. So if they want to make it an elective course on gender identity in college and they want to try to get credits, for graduation, then sure. But no, I don't feel any age in a public school should be taught that.
Okay, so you think that it should be at the university level and it should be
or in a private school.
not.
So either in a private school or an electoral class in college.
Okay.
So do you think children should be allowed to express whatever, I don't know, clothing or hairstyles or
Oh yeah, I feel like children can express, if they want to dress a certain way or have certain demeanor, sure, that's fine. I'm all for personal expression. This just goes deeper as to what the schools are doing. They're trying to take on the role of a parent, and that is not cool. I'm not saying that children of any age have to go and stick with the gender norms of what they want to play with, whether if it's a boy and they want to play with dolls, or if he wants to wear pink, or it can go on for on. I believe every child, especially in a public school, if they want to do that, that's when, the teachers, the principals make sure that that child isn't going to be bullied for expressing themselves in a way, because the school should be a safe place for people to express themselves in any way, as long as it's not hurting others. But it's an overstep to go and allow the teachers to teach things that is ultimately the responsibility of the parents.
So one last question to wrap up this episode, and since we're on the subject of schools, what are your thoughts on schools keeping a student's gender identity away from their parents? Do you think that teachers have the right to make a decision on whether or not to tell a parent whether a child has come out to them as feeling like they have a different gender? Ryan, I want to start with you.
Meaning if a child comes up to a teacher and says, I think I might be whatever.
Yes, and if they say, a boy comes up to a teacher and says he thinks he's a girl, and the teacher, the boy's not out to his parent yet. Should the teacher keep this from the parents, and or does the teacher have an obligation to tell the parents?
Well, I mean, it's complicated. It's not cut and dry, because the fact is kids can be cruel. It could be a kid trying to make fun of other kids. So is it actually like a legitimate, I'm struggling, I need help, and I'm coming to you because I trust you? Or is it they're playing a joke on someone, and the teacher finds out about it and wants to discipline them by letting the parents know that this kid is bullying other kids? I don't know. I think it's a little bit dicey to say that they automatically should tell the parents, because there are situations where, like you were discussing earlier, the parents are not supportive and wouldn't be supportive, could possibly kick them out, could possibly abuse them. And you see that a lot in the trans community. A lot of trans kids have been rejected and kicked out of their house because of it. So I don't know that telling the parents is the right approach out of the gate. Maybe it's sending them to the counselor to dig a little deeper and understand what's actually going on before they take that approach. Because most schools, I believe, have counseling departments. At least they did when I was a kid. I don't know if that's been cut lately. But going right to the parents to tell them if a kid said something like that, I think is a little bit jumping the gun.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
think you brought up a great point with that too, is I feel the teacher should go to the counselor probably, because the counselor is trained in how to deal with that situation. Because if they became a counselor, they probably went to school, to deal with psychology or whatever. I don't know what the credits are. So then they know how to delicately handle that situation with the parents. Because maybe the teacher wouldn't know the best way to word things that could set the parents off. But I'm sure the guidance counselor would be able to know how to, without upsetting the parents, in a calm way, maybe have the parents come to the school for a meeting, to let them know. I feel like parents should be informed of what's going on. And the counselor, though, would find the most diplomatic way of being able to do so in a safe way.
So, Jeremiah, I just want to be clear on your position. So do you think that the school has an obligation to tell the parent, or it's okay for the teacher to make a judgment based on the situation?
In public schools, parents need to have that automatic right of knowing everything that's going on with their child. So I stand by what I say with the child can go to the guidance counselor, but now it's the role of the public school to then approach that parent in a delicate way, of course, while making sure that the child is safe to have those discussions. So yes, parents should be informed of everything that's happening at school with their child.
Okay. I'm going to weigh in on my opinion and my experience. I personally think that if safety is an issue, a teacher should be able to make a judgment to not tell the parent. I had a very homophobic father, and I was in a child abuse situation. And one of the places I found safety was at school. Therefore, I did have a teacher who I confided in and was kind of a mentor, where I felt safe to discuss these things. And I did not have a supportive family, and actually was in danger. And having had that experience, that being said, I don't think that teachers should allow kids to use pronouns and dress without the parent knowing. I think that there's a fine line to creating a safe space for a child to have and not putting the child in danger, than necessarily moving forward and allowing the child to be a completely different gender at school without the parent knowing. I do think that goes a little bit far. But this is a conversation we're having as a American culture, so to speak, and it's complicated. It's not black and white, and it has a lot of nuances. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you again for being guests on In the Can with Carmella Cann. Thank you again for joining In the Can. Also, if you're on YouTube, feel free to subscribe to my channel, hit the subscribe button, and look out for more podcast episodes. Thank you so much and have a great day.